Hello, I'm Riley, and this is the Diegetic Advancement Podcast. Okay, this is a follow-on episode from the previous two Diegetic Advancement shows, just responding to some calls and some thoughts that follow on along from that. I don't think I'm going to have time to jump into some actual systems for how to do this, so that might be the follow-up episode, which is good. I can stretch this out for another week. I've got some great calls from Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, Daniel from Bandits Keep, and EOTB from the Classic Adventure Gaming podcast. So I'm going to let Jason take it away and respond and then get into the other calls. So take it away, Jason.
Hey, Riley, Jason here. Really enjoyed the latest podcast. I wonder if you could do that Matrix Gaming kind of thing with something like the Arnesonian dice, like what we see in Holmes and Clark. You know, we have some of the same kind of ideas where you have, pluses and minuses that are laid forth by the players, and that's going to give them a certain value. And then you're going to, now in Arsenio dice, of course, then you're going to roll the dice to see. But, I wonder if that's a way to do that. As far as diegetic advancement, I look forward to the rest of the series on that. I hesitate to comment until the series is complete. I agree with you. I personally don't mind the game elements of a game. I think what Che Webster is doing and the idea of otherworld immersion is interesting. I've played in those games. I'm currently in a game like that with Che where we're both players. But personally, I do like interacting with the game, and I think you can have immersion and you can have be engrossed in the game with the game elements, and I don't think either one's necessarily better than the other. So I like having the game elements, but I like them to be, as you say, diegetic. I like them to to make sense with the fiction as well. So yeah, I like where you're going with this, and I look forward to where it goes. So take care, keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hey, Jason here. Enjoyed your second Diegetic Advancement episode. In fact, I had recorded a segment for my upcoming episode about guilds and training and all that. But, since you've already kind of covered it, I'm not going to tread the same ground over on my show. I'll just give you a call instead. So, I think that having guilds makes sense in the world, especially in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. So in Dungeons and Dragons, even first level characters have abilities and things that other characters don't. There's a reason the thieves have their thief abilities where other classes don't. And, so on for each class. So it makes sense that there's a guild or somewhere that they're training, and they even trained at before they started adventuring at all. That's one of the issues with detailed backstories, right? But if you have guilds in your world, what are you doing with them? Because they're not just AD&D. Your guilds and places where they go train make sense in any world, like you talk about there. And I think it's interesting. So I had put a call out asking people what they're doing with guilds and how they use guilds. And I tied it in with Merck's show, since Merck's doing Delicious in Dungeon, and a lot of the Japanese anime really build on adventuring guilds, and they showcase those kind of things. But I guess that's enough for now.
Thank you for the call, Jason. On the Arnesonian Dice and Matrix Gaming, Daniel, whose call I'll play next, has something to say on this, so I'll come back to that and respond to both. And this will be the theme of the episode, but the callers have framed or phrased some of the points I was trying to make better than I can. I talked about how I like to enjoy the game for being a game, but there are many ways to get enjoyment out of RPGs, and one of those is otherworld immersion. I don't think that's for me, but it is for others. And it's really interesting to hear about when Che talks about it from the Roleplay Rescue podcast, as well as Runeslinger and Sameoldji. And Runeslinger has some show talking about different forms of immersion. And immersion in playing the game is what I'm after. And if I thought about it, that's probably the term I might have used. And it's at least the framing for my discussion on diegetic advancement. So thank you for highlighting that and reminding me of the great resources that I can point to illustrate that. I'll try and put some of the episodes from these 3 podcasters talking about the subject in the show notes. And on that, immersion with the game, I think having the game mechanics make sense or be diegetic helps us get immersed in them. Otherwise, we're really just playing with math rocks and analyzing numbers, right? Of course, the other point that I made was that enjoying one aspect of the game isn't exclusive. You know, we can enjoy getting immersed in the system, but it doesn't mean we can't enjoy other terms of immersion or aspects of play. So thank you for highlighting that. Adventuring guilds. I really hope you do put that call out and talk about it on your show. I don't think that'll cover exactly the same ground as what I've been covering. Not that you can't talk about the same things that I do. I'd be really interested to hear what you and other people have to say on that. And there's great points on first level characters typically being better than commoners, right? I mean, there's games where that's not the case, but most of the time they are. And so they must have avenues for gaining these skills. And adventuring guilds make sense. Though what these guilds actually are can depend on setting, I think. You know, the full-blown professional guild, like we see in a lot of the animes that you point out, is one type, but it could also be a small underground criminal group training thieves, or a small wizard tower in the forest just taking on a single apprentice. These aren't guilds per se, but I think they fall into the definition for what I'm talking about with training. It's sort of organizations, big or small, that provide that service. On that, I think it's a great example of the things you can generate using something like the Traveler-inspired character creation from Joe at the Dekahedron podcast, or during play with the training rules. You can build these bits of the world and tie your character to it. Circling back to the anime reference, I think that'll come up in Merck's Delicious in Dungeon review shows. I know that I talked about it in my call into that, so make sure you check that out. But yeah, it does seem like a very common trope in the fantasy anime thing. So I'm not sure exactly where that comes from. Okay, thank you for the call, Jason, and we'll jump over to Daniel.
Hey, Riley. Daniel from Bandits keep calling in about the 2 episodes about diegetic advancement, as it would be. I didn't call in for the last one. I was planning to, and then a new one popped up, so I wanted to listen to that one first. I really like how you broke it down. It makes a lot of sense. You know, I do agree that you want things to feel right in the world, and I've always thought things like, especially, and again, not trying to bash on 5e, but like the multi-classing, for instance, in 5e, where somebody will just take a dip into a level, as they call it, of something that doesn't have anything to do with what they've been doing. And they can kind of just do that between, 2 sessions of play because they leveled up. It always felt a little bit weird to me, even, and then of course, if you dig deeper into it, just the leveling up in general like that, were a feat or something to that effect. I'm not a skill-based lover. Like, that's not my favorite kind of game. So while I do appreciate how things like Call of Cthulhu, you just get better at the stuff you do, I find that's a little bit limiting because it makes it really hard for you to gain abilities you don't have, right? If we want our characters to change and develop, it's harder to do that. It's not impossible. You can actually do actual training, but again, because they're trying to make it more, quote, realistic, I think it takes like months and months between sessions. So unless you're like literally taking a big gap in play in your campaign, then you come back to it, it's hard to really gain anything that you don't already have, right? So I think I just stopped for a second because my alarm went off. So I think I finished that thought. Anyways, so I think both are good. I do think that it's nice for people to train the world. I love the idea of questing for stuff that DCC has out there. In my game, my OD&D game, for the magic users anyways, they don't automatically get new spells when they level up. They've got to research them or get them from people. And I do try to add those into the game. What I do wonder, though, is if you're going to say, all right, well, for your monk to get their next ability, they need to travel to this monastery, and you're not going to do it in some kind of outside the table way, and you're playing with the group. Like, my group plays for 2.5 hours, but we play every week. So we're relatively short sessions. I mean, do we want to spend a bunch of sessions just so the monk can level up, right? Because obviously everybody at the table wants to play the game. And I mean, I'm not saying that people don't want to help out their fellow players, but at the same time, it's like, okay, well now, especially if you're going to do milestones, right, where everybody is leveling up at the same time, now we have a bunch of side quests. So I think it's a great idea. I'm curious. I'm not actually being negative about it. I'm actually curious how you'd play that out. Maybe that would be super fun. It would be cool to like say, okay, we're going to now, everybody's leveling up. So let's go like online and do play-by-posts, or I'll do an hour with each of you kind of quick, on the phone or whatever. If you're playing person like I do, we'll do a quick like Zoom call and everybody can do a mini quest to get their stuff. That could be kind of fun too. And then they can come back and discuss what happened to them. And so I could totally see putting it in the world. In an ideal world, I would have all the time in the world to play D&D and have multiple campaigns and things crossing and everybody have different characters and stuff. But a lot of times it's hard to do that. Like I say, our group only meets once a week, and I feel like it'd be difficult to constantly stop the game for somebody to just get a skill. Now, of course, I'm playing OD&D, so it's not that big of a deal. Magic users and clerics in my campaign both have to research their spells, so I already mentioned how that works. And the rest of it's just hit points, and you get better at fighting. For the fighters, basically. Well, for everybody. So that kind of just happens because, like you said, they're already doing that. So I suppose that's why we're able to pull that off. But if I made them go somewhere to quest for something, what would the rest of the group do? What would they want to do? I don't know. And it's funny, I just say that, but I have an answer to that because we just did a quote downtime that's basically, we're basically taking 3 months off so the magic users and clerics can study and learn new spells. And I had one fighter character, and we discussed what they might want to do. And they're going to I'm going to introduce the paladin. We'll see how broken the OD&D paladin is. We're going to introduce the paladin in by having them train under a holy warrior to basically become paladin. And it was just a conversation, right? But again, it's in world, so it's not like they suddenly have this ability. So I guess it doesn't need to be played out. It could be very much just a session where we sit around the table having a discussion and telling the story of these various adventures that they did it. So at least it feels like something happened. Because I think that's, for me anyways, the reason why the diegetic thing is good. It's good because it's a story that happened in the game and not something that somebody sat at home and changed their character sheet and came back with more powers, which is basically what I encountered when I ran 5e for over 3 years. It was basically like, all right, you leveled up and people just added powers to their sheet and that was it, right? Nobody really had a second thought about it. By making it more in-game, the way I'm doing it now, I think it is more fulfilling. So I definitely think that that's cool. Now, that's a very long message, but I want to add to the indie hack sounds really interesting, and it made me think, I don't know why my brain keeps going here, to Dogs in the Vineyard, which I've talked about before, and now the reboot of it, or whatever you want to call it, just called Dogs, but almost in the opposite way, not the opposite, but closer to indie hack than to Matrix gaming, because you roll the dice first, right? It seems like in Matrix gaming, you put out your arguments first, then the GM rolls the dice and resolves. But in Dogs in the Vineyard, everybody is saying what they're doing as they're using dice. So you say, I punch them in the face, and you slide your dice over. And if they make it, right, they meet the die or beat it, they go, I block it, right? So basically you're going back and forth using, if you want to call it an argument, to do it. And in the end, when you have that final, I kick them in the shin and they can't block it, that's when you do the damage. And then something occurs, in the game, and now their shin is hurt, right? So that's basically how that works. And I'm using it for combat because that's a pretty easy example. But it can also be used for dialogue and in conversations like that and convincing people. And what's cool is because you're role-playing it out, you are adding these effects, right? You are saying these things to these people. So they are happening in the world, which is kind of cool because at the end of the social interaction, it's not just I rolled charisma and I charmed them. It's this came out in this conversation. And in the end, they backed down for this reason. And that helps build the story. So I can definitely see how this kind of idea of arguments, if you will, for lack of a better word, or details can really liven up the game. Very, very cool. I think my message is almost as long as your episode was. So I will stop here. Great podcast. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel, for the call. I'll cover the last part of your call first, as Jason mentioned something earlier in his call. To remind everyone, Jason drew some similarities between the Arnesonian dice system and Matrix gaming, and now Daniel's drawing some similarities between dogs, which I'm looking forward to Daniel's show on, if he gets around to it. Now, all of these systems are obviously different, but the common thread, I think, is that the dice or odds come from the narrative. Matrix gaming uses the fiction to construct arguments, which the GM assigns odds to. The indie hack uses details in the fiction. Arnesonian dice is certainly more narrative in focus, and the number of dice you roll are based on advantages that you have, which you could use arguments for. And lastly, dogs has you rolling dice for each of the actions you take in the fiction. To tie it in with the topic, though, all of these mechanics sort of force you to engage with the fiction. So you could say they're more diegetic. I think there's something here for a simple generic skill or task resolution system. Drawing on mechanized elements of the fiction to resolve things. And maybe I'll come back to that in the future. Okay, back to probably the study called the diegetic advancement stuff. Yeah, I think you're on the money. It feels right when the systems gel with the world. Multi-classing is one of those things from 5e and other games that doesn't feel right a lot of the time, and that comes down to the hand waviness of leveling up. You can just kind of justify why you advance in your class, but where did you pick up that warlock level? And yet, sealing a deal with a demon or something would be a great adventure or a piece of actual game that you could play. So you end up removing that opportunity. And yeah, I think I feel the same way about skill-based systems, sort of limiting freedom in a way. And I know that not everyone feels that way. I just started playing a Traveller game, play by post, so we'll see if that changes my mind. I like how you make the magic users research the spells. I suppose I wouldn't make them train on top of that. That kind of seems like that's their training. Whilst they're poring over tomes, the fighter is out practicing maneuvers or whatever they do. And magic users are just such a good example of how we can make this happen, and it's because it's kind of easy. As you're delving through dungeons, you're just going to find a whole bunch of old scrolls and books, and these can be filled with spells. And so the stuff that you find playing the game, you can then go back and train and learn that stuff. It's a little bit harder to tie those things in with the other classes. It just works really well for magic users, but they're a good example of how to make that work really well. Now, some great questions on how this actually works in play. If we had infinite time, I figure we'd just play everything out, and that would be great, but we can't be so lucky. So we have to pick what we actually represent at the table and what we abstract away. For the monk example, I don't think I'd stop anyone from actually leveling up by forcing them to do a quest, though my next caller makes a good point about this, and maybe it makes sense if they're trying to multi-class. But I might take some of their key abilities that they get at high level, their like milestone abilities, and give them quests for those early on, so they have a lot of time to get them done, and that way they feel significant, right? They find this ancient book on some meditation technique or flow, and then they can study that over their adventuring career, and that culminates in that milestone ability. Though, this likely feels bad if they just don't do it, and I don't want to railroad my players. I tend to play systems with fewer character abilities tied to level, though, so I don't think this would really cause an issue, because I just let them get the what they get from their class natively, and that's what training would give them, and the stuff that they could quest for would be extra stuff, and so they get to choose what they do. Now, play by post downtime or side sessions, short sessions, duets or something like that, be another great way to handle this. You could handle it as a sort of storytelling, more narrative activity when you take that downtime. That'd be another way to make it feel real and meaningful instead of just hand waving it. And of course, we could build a little mini game for this abstraction as well, similar to the Traveler character creation again. We could have a leveling or training mini game. You roll some dice, you make some choices, roll on some tables, and you end up with inspirational sparks for what's occurred narratively, but also providing mechanical effects and potentially some consequences. You gain an ally or a new contact, or you get a little bit of equipment, or you lose some equipment, or you start with an injury, something like that. Kind of similar to like a carousing table. And I think this would work really well for a system like Shadow Dark, where what we're getting each level is random. This would let the players have some more control over the system, but give it narrative weight as well. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. It's going to depend on the group, the game, and a whole bunch of other things. But as a baseline, if we can avoid hand-waving, I think that's a good start. And where we can create adventure or game, we should try to. Okay, thank you so much for the call, Daniel. Got a new caller, EOTB from the Classic Adventure Gaming podcast, which is a fantastic podcast all about AD&D and adventure gaming, which I'm not a master of, but something I try to talk about on this show. EOTB is a master of that, so let's listen to what he has to say.
Hey Riley, this is EOTB from the CAG podcast. I was just listening to your latest episode where you were talking about training, and you mentioned something that is why I love the training rule, which it isn't about the money. It's not about like the rating system or anything like that. People focus on the parts of the rule that I think the players see the most. But what I love about it is the world interactivity. If you have a GM or DM who likes to get into the world building part, training is just such a great way to get you involved with the world. And if players don't have the cash to train right away, which is often a core complaint, like that it takes so much money to train and people are poor. And yes, to a certain extent, that's a feature of the system. But it wasn't exactly used that way all of the time. I mean, what's presented in the books is the premium, I guess you could say, to where if you wanted to maintain the maximum control over your time and to be doing your own bidding all of the time, then you would pay cash. But it wasn't required. One of the little bits in the DMG, it talks about that the amount could be reduced or waived entirely if someone is willing to do, like a service or a quest. I can't remember the wording for the trainer. And I use the Ready Ref. There's in the Ready Ref sheets from Judges Guild, in the Limited Wish section, there's a little quests and geshes table that just has very simple missions, like rescue object or escort creature, and it just gives you enough tables to like map out a little quick scenario. I'll use those all the time to waive training costs, and they're nothing big. It should be all like something that one character can do in a night of play, maybe another character if they want to like hop on and help out. And it doesn't take a long time. It does take a little bit more commitment, but it continues to enmesh the characters in the world that you were talking about, that I guess diegetic process, to where the training gives them relationships, it gives them experiences, it gives them knowledge that they can then loop into the other parts of play. So if people have the time and they enjoy the world building, but they've got other qualms about training, I would suggest looking into those rules, to where you just offer little mini quests, maybe in between sessions, just something quick you can throw together, and get that player some more information to use in the game. One other thing that Gygax mentioned on, and this was in forums, people were asking him about training, and he mentioned that he only really enforced training strictly if people had a total windfall. In essence, to where the character spent very little time in the previous level, didn't really use much of the skills, but they just got a total windfall treasure, and then he would enforce the training strictly. So, I mean, that's another way to look at it. That's another way to go. That if somebody spends a long time in their level, and when I say long time, I mean like they've plumbed pretty much all of the new stuff that they got from that level. They've shown like a grasp of it in play. The training can be also significantly reduced or waived. So, but great episode. Hope you're doing well, and talk to you later.
Okay, thanks for the call, EOTB. As I said in response to Jason's call, there's a lot of what I was trying to say in my episodes said better here. Really good way of highlighting how a simple system like training can tie characters into the world and provide much more. You can give players extra information about the world so that they can use and play rather than just making it a dice roll and hand waving it. If you really think about what's actually happening in the fiction, and if the players try to exploit it to their advantage, you can get much more from it. And it's a great opportunity for the GM that likes to world build, as you said. I really like the framing of spending gold to have control over your time. Sure, the training costs are high, but if you don't want to pay them, what else can you do? Favors, quests, these are all extra hooks to drive player. They're not punishments, right? Yeah, the last point on how Gary might handwave training, I like it. I think it gives some more context to the rating system as well. So thanks for sharing that. The shout out to the Ready Refs sheets. It's a real shame that we can't get our hands on all the great Judges Guild products currently. You say what you like about Wizards, but being able to pick up PDFs with the old systems and products is just such a huge boon for people starting out in the hobby, later in life, that want to explore use of the old school. As I mentioned in my response to Daniel, the possibility to do short side sessions with just one or two players is great. It can give you that living world feeling and really expand the game. We can't all be so lucky, of course. Though I think that's what I'm trying to build myself up to. Trying to run a grand campaign, just running one game, potentially trying to get multiple groups going, having characters act independently, not just in their sort of party of 4 or 5, which is sort of the more standard way of playing now. And I think that's part of why I'm sharing my thoughts here, and I really appreciate getting feedback and listening to people's thoughts. So thank you so much, EOTB, for listening and calling in, as well as Daniel from the Bandits Keep and Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Thank you very much for your call-ins. As I said, some great little nuggets here where they've probably explained something a little bit better than I had phrased it originally, but spurred some good conversation. And on that note, the Classic Adventure Gaming podcast is a really good resource for some of this old school wisdom. So links to that, as well as sort of all the contact details for my callers, will be in the show notes. Thank you so much again. We're running very long, so I'm going to skip all my other regular segments, content shoutouts and things like that, and we'll call the episode here. That's all I've got time for this week, folks. Talk to you later. If anyone is listening, I'd love to hear your feedback. You can reach me via Spotify, SpeakPipe, Discord, or email. Details, along with everything I've talked about today, are in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.